glad you're all here. Absolutely happy to get this all started off. Do we have any? I know we've got a couple of people use Rancher Desktop in here. Anybody? Or never heard of it before? Heard of it? Okay. Well, so we'll kind of get you into a kind of an introduction to what Rancher Desktop is. So just for a quick kickoff, my name is Dwain Sims. I'm a sales engineer for SUSE like SUSE? Well, I thought you were talking about Rancher. SUSE actually owns Rancher. We bought Rancher in 2020. So we have very much fully adopted the Rancher code into our world. Also, I've got Colin Griffin here today. He's going to be doing the demo. We sort of called an audible on this yesterday. I had planned to do this all by myself, and when I saw Colin the other on Tuesday, I said, "My gosh, I didn't even know you were going to be here." I said, "This would be great if you could. We should have done this together." And I was thinking later, like, well, we could still do it together. So we decided to break this apart. So I'm going to do the presentation, and Colin will be doing the demo later. So I will let Colin introduce himself as we get to that part. But I'm going to kind of walk you through what Rancher Desktop is, and then he's going to show it to you and all of the good stuff that it does. So that will get us started. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I've been with SUSE for about 5 years. So I've been doing this for a little while. Please come by the booth later. We still have some good swag left. We held some back so we'd have some for the second day. So happy to get you some good stuff to take with you. I just want to give you a quick idea of how does SUSE fit into all this and Rancher fit into all these things. So again, we bought Rancher in 2020. SUSE is the oldest enterprise Linux distribution. We've been around for about 30 years. We're as big a name in Europe as the other guys are in North America. So you can get an idea of what we do. So if you look at our chart here, we call this our cube cake. The top layer there is all of the developer tools and the things that we're actually doing around containers. So that's why we bought Rancher. Rancher is the premier way of actually managing multiple Kubernetes clusters. So one of the things we find that folks that adopt Kubernetes, they get a Kubernetes cluster, they stand up their first one, and the next thing you know, they've got 20. That's what tends to happen in most organizations. And when you get 20, that's hard to manage. That's a tough thing to deal with. And so we've got Kubernetes that proliferates in organizations, tends to run on-prem, multiple clouds, and what Rancher does is lets you have common policies and common tooling across all of those Kubernetes clusters. So it makes it very much easier to manage as you go down the road. Also want to add here, everything that SUSE has, every piece of code that we distribute is open source. We don't do anything that's not open source. So everything we've got is free. You can go grab it and start using it this afternoon. No problem at all. Go grab it. How do we make any money? How do I pay for my kids' college and all that kind of stuff? We do this by selling support, selling services, or selling training. That's the only ways we make money. So if you want enterprise support, that's what we do with Rancher now, just like we do with Linux and the other tools that we have. But it's all open source. You can go grab the open source pieces of it, and it's the same code. We don't hold back stuff and make part of it proprietary that you get with the enterprise version. That's not the way it works. It's the same code for everything. So I urge you to go, if any of these things sound interesting, go grab them and start playing with them. Yes, sir?
And it doesn't matter what distribution of Linux?
So Rancher will run on just about any distribution of Linux. I won't say, I'm sure you could come up with one that it wouldn't run on, but for the most part, all of the mainstream Linuxes, Rancher will run on top of. Now, we think it runs best on SLES, but we know that not everybody's going to do that. So we have a specific distribution of SLES that's called SLE Micro that's really designed for running containers and Kubernetes. that's probably the best distribution you could run it on, but you may have different ideas about what you want to run it on. That's perfectly fine. So we're perfectly fine with that. But as you look at the other things on that list, yes, sir.
The reason I asked is just because Podman and Docker and all that, I've read that.
I understand. So totally. So we're really agnostic to that. So we're opinionated, but we're not dogmatic. Okay. So anyway, that's really what we have on the top layer there. And then we have down below, we have our Kubernetes distributions, which are RKE and K3S. Now, RKE is a distribution that's more aimed at probably data center, on-prem kind of things. That works great. It's a really good distribution of Kubernetes. But we also have K3S. K3S is a very much lightweight version of Kubernetes that will run on things as small as a Raspberry Pi. I've got K3S running on a Raspberry Pi, and I swear I don't even know where the thing's at anymore. It's under a bookcase or someplace, and it's been running for like 800 days. And I use it for my demos and stuff, but I swear I don't know where it's at the moment because it's got pushed under something. So, yes, sir.
This is the version of Kubernetes itself.
I'm sorry?
This is the version of Kubernetes itself.
It's a distribution of Kubernetes.
Okay, so are certain operators and things stripped out or in the distribution?
We sort of package, we take the upstream Kubernetes and we package it up, we make it easy to install, and that's what we're pushing out.
Oh, okay, and is there like an opinionated philosophy behind it? Is it basically just strip it down so it's available on the edge and run it? Or
Yes, that is kind of what we're aiming at. Absolutely, sure thing, absolutely. And then we get into some of the other things. We've got Longhorn, which is an open source way of actually doing storage in a Kubernetes cluster. So if you're building out a system of nodes that are going to be running Kubernetes, you can actually run Longhorn on that and supply storage to that thing. It becomes a storage source for your Kubernetes cluster. Then we also have NuVector. NuVector is a way of actually doing security for your containerized workloads. Containerized workloads do not work the way that standard workloads run. So standard security tools don't really apply very well to containerized workloads. And so we bought NuVector in 2021, and it's a very nice product for providing security in those kind of environments. So if you're interested in that, come by the booth later and I'll take you through a deeper dive into that. We can also set up demos for you later on if you need to see that. Glad to do that. And then we've got our standard Linux products, lots of different flavors of Linux, things from data center to desktop to Slave Micro that I was talking about before. We also have management tools. Our management tools are also agnostic. We will manage any kind of Linux that you're running in your environment. We don't care. We can manage Ubuntu, we can manage Red Hat, we can manage Rocky or Alma or any of the CentOS replacements that have popped up on the market. We handle those just as well as we handle SLES. We have customers that are running, I have customers that are managing like 4 different distributions at the same time. So it's common tooling across all of them. So that's what SUSE Manager can do for you. And then again, we're running anywhere that you need to run, whether it's in the data center, out in the cloud. We're very cloud agnostic. We work with all the major cloud vendors. We love them all. Our customers love them, and that's who we go with. We also do a lot of work now at the edge, and that's becoming a really big market for us. The edge was something SUSE was always doing anyway, especially point of sale. A lot of the grocery store chains and retailers actually run SLES on their cash registers. You may not realize that. You go into Kroger and that's actually SLES running on that cash register when you get checked out. So we've been doing that for a long time, but now folks are starting to move Kubernetes-based applications, containerized applications, into the edge. And so we've got tooling and using K3S, we're actually moving into that world as well. So We've got customers that are actually running things on things as disparate as cars, locomotives, cruise ships, all kinds of fun and interesting things. So let's push on. Let's talk about Rancher Desktop a little bit. So what the heck is Rancher Desktop? So, oh, I'm sorry, I'm muted. Excuse me. There we go. Thank you, sir. I have a pretty loud voice, so as my wife tells me all the time. Anyway, so let's talk about Kubernetes on the desktop. How many folks have actually tried to use Kubernetes on a desktop machine? We got a few folks, yeah. So yeah, this has been going on for a while, and there's lots of different ways of doing this. So I'm going to kind of walk through some of the possibilities of running Kubernetes on a desktop. One of these was Kind. Kubernetes and Docker was one of the first ones. Folks still use this from time to time. I have never used this one. Anybody in the room use Kind? A few folks have messed with Kind a little bit. It seems to serve a purpose. Minikube, I've used Minikube. I know at one point I took a class that was going through Kubernetes, and that's what they used was Minikube, and that seemed to work pretty well. Very kind of terminal desktop, off in a terminal window kind of thing. But yeah, it seems to work pretty well. K3s, K3D. Everybody ever use that one? That one's basically running. Now the K3s distribution is Rancher's, and so this is a wrapper that basically allows you to run that K3s distribution in Docker, and I like the wording on the side there. So we got this Docker theme going on all the time here, right? And a little bit of a terminal theme as well that you see as folks are doing this, especially on Windows machines and Macs, ways to do that. And then there's Docker Desktop. That's another one. Now, Docker Desktop, they kind of roiled the market a little bit because they had a free product for quite a while. And then all at once they decided to change their mind and start sending people bills. And they did that to us because we were using Docker Desktop a lot. SUSE was using Docker Desktop quite a bit, and we were happy with Docker Desktop until they sent the bill, and it's like, oh my gosh, this doesn't go well. So we were not thrilled with that part, and that's when we sort of got the idea to go off and build Rancher Desktop. I have a prop here. I brought this prop with me. Does anybody know what this is? Anybody got a guess? A Nokia? That's a good guess. It's not. This is the very first iPhone. What? Yeah, really. It says it right here on the back. iPhone. This is the very first iPhone. It was made by Linksys. Back in 97, something like that. Apple came along later and bought the name from Cisco, because Cisco wound up buying Linksys. But this was the very first iPhone. And the reason I showed this prop here is I actually bought one of these. This thing was designed to work with Skype. Remember Skype? When Skype first came out, you had a little adapter you could plug into your laptop, and then this phone had connected to the adapter. And if you were on the road or whatever, you could make real phone calls from this thing using Skype. And it was much easier than trying to hook up all the headsets and all that kind of stuff. I could actually use a phone and walk around a hotel room and talk to my kids and my wife, and it was kind of cool. I used it in Europe a few times, and it was really kind of neat, but I've kept it because it says iPhone on the back. It's the only iPhone I've ever owned. So, but the reason I show this is to sort of show not necessarily the first folks to market always have the best product, right? They were first to market. They were the first ones to have an iPhone, and you don't hear about Linksys much anymore. So, but that's neither here nor there. Kind of fun thing to look at. Anyway, so Docker Desktop had a great product. I mean, folks were using it all over the place. They started sending bills to folks. Well, we decided we didn't want to pay that bill. We didn't have enough budget set aside to pay that bill for the number of folks that were using it internally at SUSE. So we had a team that actually went off and started building Rancher Desktop. The guy who's actually in charge of building Rancher Desktop is Matt Farina. I don't know if anybody's heard of Matt Farina before. Matt's actually the guy that does Helm. So he's the Helm guy. And he's the guy that's also behind Rancher Desktop, same time. So same guy. So one of the features of Rancher Desktop is that you could run many different versions of Kubernetes in it. So one of the things we find, and this is a picture of not folks running Kubernetes, this is a picture of folks running Android. I haven't ever found a good picture of how this breaks down with versions of Kubernetes, but the one of Android actually works pretty well. This is the number of versions of Kubernetes that are actually running, or of Android that are running in the field at any given time. And you can notice there's older versions going back to 7.0 all the way up to 13. I mean, there's a large mix. Over time it changes, but there's a large mix of folks running different versions of Android. Kubernetes is the exact same way. One of the problems we have as a company, that especially with our Kubernetes distributions and Rancher itself, folks come along and say, oh my gosh, I want support for 1.17. I still need that because I've got pods, I've got applications, workloads that will only run on 1.17. So I've got to have support for that old version. And at the same time, I've got folks that are just dying to get 1.26 and 1.27 as they push out. And it's like, so we've got folks still wanting us to support all the old versions and the new versions as they come out and get them out in a timely manner. So it's a dichotomy we have to deal with here all the time. So it's interesting the thing that we see. One of the things we do with Rancher Desktop, we let you pick what version of Kubernetes you want to run. So you can actually pull it up and actually operate whatever version you need to run for the workloads that you're working on. So we don't tie you into a single version of Kubernetes. When we got into building this, we noticed there were no really good open source Kubernetes distributions at all. So for the desktop. So one of the other ones that was still out there was Kube Solo. I never tried this one. Apparently it only runs on a Mac that I've been able to tell. That was a pretty good one. That showed a lot of promise at one point. But this is what Rancher Desktop looks like. We have a nice GUI-based system for actually setting it up and administrating it. And it ties back in to whatever system you're running on. It runs on Windows, it runs on Mac, it runs on Linux. Now, I have used it on Windows and I've used it on Linux. I don't have a Mac to run it on, but I'm told it runs really well. It runs on M1 Macs, runs on Intel Macs, doesn't matter. We supports both. I know I had somebody here at the show come up and say, this thing saved me because it runs on M1. So, well, that's great. Glad to hear that. So we support all of these versions. I think on Linux, there's lots of ways to run Kubernetes on Linux. I don't know that you necessarily, we don't see as much adoption on Linux as we do with Windows or with Mac. I'm currently running it on Windows. That's what I brought with me today. But I've got several people on my team that actually run it on Mac all the time too. So you can go and download Rancher Desktop at rancherdesktop.io. It is totally free. It is totally open source. I work in sales, so my job is to help sell software. I don't even have a SKU for this. We can't sell it because we don't have any way of selling this product. So it's totally free. I know somebody came up to me the other day and said, well, can you guarantee it will remain free? Yeah, it's open source. I mean, if somebody acquired SUSE and decided, oh no, we're going to make this proprietary or whatever, can't really do it. I mean, it's under the GPL. So the worst thing that would happen is somebody would go fork it at that point. So I can't guarantee you that the product that SUSE always pushes out the door is going to be free. But the code, where it's at today, is totally free because it's totally open source. So somebody will come along and be able to fork this and make it work. Later, that's the only guarantee I can ever give anybody, but I can just say the ethos inside of SUSE is to make everything we do is open source, so I don't see us changing that anytime soon. So how does this actually work? Well, Mac and Linux, especially on Mac, both of these are really Unix kind of like systems. So they work a little differently and they tie in back to Kubernetes. That way, we also supply all the tooling that you need to go with it. So Helm is there. If you want to use this in a more of a Docker-based thing, you could choose that. We will also run Containerd. You can go either way. So the runtime can be either Docker or Containerd, and we have the tooling to go with that. So if you want to run Docker commands, that's fine. You can run the Docker commands. If you want to use Nerdy control, you can do that too. You can run that with the Containerd stuff. That works well. Windows actually ties in back into the Windows subsystem for Linux. That's the way I'm running this today because I tie back into, and I've got OpenSUSE Leap 15.3 running on my system under WSL, and that's the way that I'm actually doing this. And it is a full-blown Kubernetes system. I know somebody came by yesterday and wanted to see Rancher. I didn't actually have my laptop out at the time, but I've got it set up this morning. I'm running Rancher on my laptop. So if you want to see the whole Rancher management system, I can bring it up for you. It's only managing one Kubernetes, which is the local Kubernetes, the K3S that's running on the desktop. But you can see it there. It works the same way. So that was our design goal, was to make this open source. So we're doing this internally for our own use at first, and then we pushed it out so everybody can start grabbing it, and that's what's been happening. Again, we wanted to leverage all the upstream projects that are already open source and pull those into the ecosystem. We wanted to make it very easy to install. I know on Windows it's super easy to install. We just have our standard Windows installer, pops right up. It's very easy to upgrade. I'm not a developer. That's one of the reasons why we decided to have Colin do the demo, because he is a developer. That's his job that he does every day. So he's always developing code. And he can tell you more about the developer piece of this, how it works. I don't develop all the time, so my Windows system sometimes gets behind. I had to update this before I came here to make sure we were reasonably up to date on the versions and everything. But the updates are really simple to do. And you can tie this into whatever tool chains you want. If you want to use it with VS Code or something like that, or Eclipse or whatever you might be running, it's easy to tie those things in. And I've seen those demos, but again, I'm not a developer, so I don't do that kind of stuff very often. Colin could talk to you more about how that works. And with that, I'm going to let Colin take over because he's got a demo for you.
So I'm Colin Griffin. I'm a software developer. I started using Rancher probably about 5 years ago. I come from a background where air-gapped deployments are required, right? I started with containers probably around 2016. And we use containers as a way to actually be able to package and deliver and run software remotely and in on-prem environments as well. In different compliant infrastructure spaces, a ton of companies that are still running workloads on-prem or even in the cloud. We don't have the luxury of using tools like Vercel or some of the other like SaaS-based cloud deployment products that are out there today. So we need to understand how to package our containers and run them up in the cloud, and so we chose and we run Kubernetes as a method of doing that. Now, one of the big problems that we've had from a developer experience standpoint is Kubernetes is a pain in the ass. It's really, really, really hard, and it's definitely hard to figure out. So who here actually uses containers in their development workflow? Cool, and for the others, who on the IT ops side, somebody takes care of your code and packages that up and puts it into a container and then ships that? Is anybody actually running and developing in the container as well? So less and less, right? The challenge for me as a developer is I want my workloads to have parity and run up in production the same way they run on my local machine. I get tired of hearing it works on my machine, right? Oh, go try it on that one. Oh, it doesn't work on ARM, right? All these different challenges. I need a way to circumvent that. For me, I need to pull my tools closer and closer and closer to the desktop, and I need to be able to develop code in Kubernetes as well, the same way that it will be out in production. That helps me sleep at night. So when I make a code change and it runs on my local machine, I know that when I commit that and that pull request gets merged, that it will work and run, and I'm not going to get an angry phone call in the middle of the night. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways that we use Rancher Desktop. We used to use Docker Desktop, and I'm used to going through the process of, okay, I download Docker Desktop, now I need to go and install Helm and find all these different tools. One thing that was really, really nice about Rancher Desktop out of the box when it came out, right around that time that Docker announced the requirement for their subscriptions and things like that, was it comes with all that shit. It has everything baked in for us. The other thing that was really convenient is I'm on Windows, unfortunately, right? I need all those Office products, and I need to run Windows, and I still occasionally compile a .NET application or WCF. Like, I still do things where I need the Windows tooling. So I need to run this in WSL, but I don't want to teach my developers how to install something on Linux when I install it differently for WSL and run them through that as well. So Docker Desktop, or Rancher Desktop out of the box, has a great install experience where it will install directly and integrate with WSL out of the gate. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of that and stop soapboxing.
So Colin, you're not displaying anything yet.
Oh, it's not?
It's on.
All right. I'm plugged in.
There you are. Good.
Here we go. Sweet. I think, is that the same screen? Cool. I can't tell if I'm mirroring or not, sorry.
It's VS Code.
All right, can you guys see? Is it zoomed enough?
That looks pretty good.
Okay. Is that the same thing? I think so.
Yep.
All right. Cool. So, Rancher Desktop. Let's open Rancher Desktop. Graphics drivers driving me nuts. So this is the home screen of Rancher Desktop. So right out of the gate, I get to choose whether or not I'm going to run Kubernetes. So that's really important for me. When I'm going through my developer journey and I adopt this tool, I'm probably using Docker Compose, right? I'm probably at that stage if I'm advanced in packaging things up. But out of the gate, I just need to be able to build containers and run containers. So Rancher Desktop, let's see, gives me some of those nice tools out of the gate, does some of the same things. I can list all of my images. I can see what's actually built on my local machine. It also gives me some nice troubleshooting tools, access to logs right out of the gate. That's really nice to see. Logs are all just log files. It's not obfuscated and hidden behind some kind of embedded tools there. I get direct access to all this stuff. As well as some additional diagnostic tools. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong locally on Kubernetes when you run things like Minikube and you're trying to figure out configuration issues. There's actually some self-diagnosing tooling that's built into Rancher Desktop that saved me several times and can help me figure out if maybe I don't have permission set on a file properly or something's gotten screwy when I'm playing with my WSL instance. If I look at settings that are available, can you guys see this okay? I'm not sure I can zoom the screen here.
It looks pretty good.
Let's see. So we're checking for automatic updates. So we've got some general developer lifecycle stuff. That's great. We can select and choose our WSL distributions. If I have multiple distributions, I can switch and point Rancher Desktop at that distribution. The way that this works, as far as we understand behind the scenes, is just leveraging a symlink. I don't have a different version of Docker running on Windows than I do in Linux.
Can you believe he's running Ubuntu? I mean, gosh.
Yeah, right? So when I go into WSL and I run something, let me just open up a terminal. Let's see. So when I go into WSL and I run Docker PS, right? I've got all my normal Docker tooling. Here you can actually see that there's a ton of Kubernetes-based containers and things that are running right now as well. So Kubernetes is just running in containers and it's running on Moby, or the open source project for Docker. So if I actually open up and run in PowerShell, I'm going to see those same workloads. Has anyone had that issue before where you're running 2 different Docker daemons on the same machine? Right, and that's a huge pain as well. So I want to be able to use whatever tools, and I'm going to prefer to live in WSL as much as possible, but there we're streamlining some things and eliminating some issues, right? If I go back to this. Container engine, this is the big one that we were asking about. So the reason that we started using Rancher back in the day was because we needed like a developer IDE for Kubernetes. We needed platform tooling. I guess that's going to be the big buzzword that's coming out now, is like an internal developer platform. So Rancher was an unopinionated way that we could run Kubernetes clusters on any Kubernetes distribution. It didn't really care. It just is a user interface that runs on top of Kubernetes and helps you interact with the Kubernetes APIs. So that's why we chose it over some of the other tools that are out there being presented in the hallway today. Because we don't want to marry ourselves to a particular provider and get handcuffed, right? So we've been using the open source version of Rancher for a while. In the same spirit here, we're able to switch between Moby and Docker and Containerd. The reason that's important to me as a developer is probably 95, maybe 99% of the guides that are out there for Docker today still include Docker, right? We associate Docker with containers. Containers are Docker. It's like the Google for search, right? So I still choose locally to run Docker because I have parity now with all those examples, instructions, the things my developers are trying to adopt, the things my customers are trying to adopt, things like that. So it's really easy, okay, I'm gonna select and run Docker out of the box. That's the tool that I wanna use. That'll give us access, again, to be able to run Docker PS and talk to the Docker daemon for us and set all of that up. If I switch to Containerd or nerdctl, Docker no longer works and I have to use those commands. Now, another thing that's becoming more and more important as people are producing more Helm charts and other packaged tools and things that run on Kubernetes, I didn't think I would use this a whole lot or care about it, is the ability to switch Kubernetes versions. So being able to just select any minor or major version of Kubernetes, if you guys can see this, has saved me a bunch of times, especially when the Helm charts say it requires like 1.24 or a different version of Kubernetes. So that's really great to be able to switch. And what happens is it basically just restarts the process. It downloads a different distribution of K3s for that version and runs it. I don't trust the internet here because it's about 200 megs when you download a distro, but it takes probably 10 to 20 seconds on a good connection to switch Kubernetes distributions, which is awesome. And my containers and pods and things will still be running, which is great. This one I wish wasn't really hidden, but it's really important to me as a developer as well. They have traffic, the load balancer, baked into this out of the box. You can turn it off, but does anyone here, when you're developing, are you still doing localhost colon 3001, standing up your workloads individually and doing things like that? One of the first things that we teach developers when you move into a Kubernetes mindset is put a load balancer in your stack, right? Use something like Traffic that can be context aware and communicate with the Kubernetes APIs, just like it will be in production, and then use that to load balance your workloads to your local workloads. Having this baked into Rancher Desktop is an amazing tool to enable developers to understand that. What we can teach them now is add an ingress route, and that will pop up and open up in Traffic. The caveat, the great thing here is you don't have to do that, right? This still works out of the box, just like Docker, if you want to do bind to port 3001. A final thing I'll show, and I want to show a couple of developer workflows, and I don't know how we're doing on time.
No, we're fine.
We're fine? Okay. So how many people have another tool that runs locally like Lens or something to debug at Kubernetes? Okay. So Kubernetes, right, like if I want to talk to Kubernetes, I might say, let's see, kubectl get pods is probably the most common thing that I'm going to run. That's going to show me what pods are running in Kubernetes. But it's a pain to use all of that, especially when I'm trying to go just find some information or get some logs. So I'll typically, in some cases, maybe I'll open Lens and connect to a cluster. But the dashboard, there's a dashboard that actually comes with Rancher Desktop as well. So I'm going to open up that cluster dashboard. So this cluster dashboard is just like what I will see on Rancher if I use the web version of Rancher. This is just a lighter weight version, but I've got access to all of my resources. I can see my namespaces, my nodes. I really wish I could zoom this. Let's see, view, can I zoom in? Look at that. Somebody thought of us. Thank you, Matt Farina.
Yes.
He probably presents 1,000 times. So I've got access to all the things that I need. I can take a look at secrets or config maps. I can get access to anything underneath the hood for Kubernetes that I want. Here's my ingress class for traffic that came out of the box. I can start to learn how to create cron jobs and other things that Kubernetes helps me run, right? So I'm starting to build the same capabilities locally on my development stack that I need to use in production. That unlocks some of these tools for developers. The big important thing for me as a developer is I don't want to have to go learn proprietary tooling. I don't want to have to think about the infrastructure. If I could just do infrastructure as code at the software level, the software layer level, that's what Kubernetes allows me to do. I can just define the resources and networking rules and things that I need and ship it. And so now I can do all of that locally with parity. So we can do some other nice lifecycle things. We can download a kube config and connect it to our local cluster with other tools. Copy that to clipboard, upload a YAML manually, search for resources, do anything that we need. And that's really, really, really nice from a developer standpoint. Now, just to show a couple of other workflows, I want to show the value of being able to run Kubernetes locally. Because it's one thing to just replace Docker Desktop with an equivalent tool like Rancher Desktop that gives you a ton of upside, obviously. But it's another thing to actually take advantage of that tool and use some of the workflows and run with a Kubernetes mindset. So what I've got is our website is actually a technical example that we use for Kubernetes and deploying using Kubernetes. Is anybody actively deploying applications with Helm today? Cool. Are you using Helm locally to run your applications? You're not. You should be, and it's easy, and it's awesome to be able to do that. So what we do is we use a tool called Scaffold. So two tools. We use Helm and we use Scaffold. Helm helps us template and render the Kubernetes resource files that we're going to ship to our cluster. And Scaffold gives us some lifecycle tools around building our container images and tagging them with dirty images and running those locally. That gives us a really similar workflow and feel to Docker Compose. I couldn't do that really easily out of the box unless I had a tool like Rancher Desktop that already came with Helm and some of those other tools. So I've installed Scaffold here, and I didn't have to do anything else, nothing else proprietary. What Scaffold's going to do, so if I take a peek, let me just take a peek. Where's my chart? Right, so a typical Helm chart has templates for different resources, Kubernetes resources that you're going to deploy. So horizontal pod, autoscaler, an ingress rule, deployments. Maybe you have, in our case, we have a separate collection for our API. That's a backend behind our site that we're going to render some resources into. And this would be a pain. I could Helm install, run, do some things like that, or Helm install upgrade. But I don't want that lifecycle. What I want is something like Docker Compose. So for running, what developers do to run our local project is just run scaffold dev. And I'm going to pray to the internet gods a little bit here. So what Scaffold is going to do is actually going to detect for caching locally. It will build my container, tag it with dirty images, and then render the Helm for me. And insert those values into Helm, and then push those to my local cluster. So now you'll notice I have workloads running, and it's given me a crumweb.localhost as my address. And it's on, this is great with Rancher Desktop. It automatically, and it works on Windows, uses port 80 and 443. It works, and that's beautiful. No more port 8080, 8443, 3001, none of that crap. We're actually going to use a proper load balancer and be able to access our site and do all of the other lifecycle things that we need, like hot reloading. And of course, it's not going to work out of the gate. But it gives us all those tools, and it works locally. This is what this would look like here. Now, parity in our dev environments, right? If I go back here, sure, let's see. Oh, what I should have done is I should have shown this workload in the dashboard. It's okay. So another cool thing about this, so now because I know this runs locally, I can actually run this on another cloud, another cluster, without changing really anything. So in my scaffold config, I've said I want to create a profile that uses a different ingress rule. So colin.web.development.chrome.io, like a live URL. I need it to create a certificate. So it, Let's Encrypt needs to generate a certificate for me. I need this to be a live available workload. So as a developer, that's a lot of work and effort and coordination that I need to do with infrastructure teams. Instead, I'm going to run scaffold dev -p, so my profile live. And using that configuration now, it's talking to a remote cluster, it's checking for a version of that image on the remote cluster, it's pushing my local dirty image up to a repository or up to a registry and pulling that, and then attaching to my workload so I can get live debugging from my remote cluster. But the beauty of that is I've got parity with Kubernetes remotely and locally through that Helm deployment workflow and through these tools that Rancher Desktop lets me have. So that was the browser I already had open. I gotta wait for my ingress route to show up, it looks like, but there we go. So now our website, it should load here in a sec. Stupid Webpack. Anyway, that's what our website looks like, and what I would normally do is do live reloading and change some files, but the cool thing about the live reloading is I'm pushing and deploying actual files and resources, right? It's not just some magic that's happening in memory. It is the actual resources that are running out there. Let's see, yeah, so it finally loaded, there we go. You'll also notice that I've actually, so this gives me a live domain, and that's really nice for a developer when I want to share with another developer and I don't want to run ngrok or do some things there. So that's great. Now on the other side, lots of us are familiar with running Docker Compose. So we've got another project that we use called cal.com. It's an awesome scheduling tool. If you guys are using Calendly, give this other one a shot. You can self-host it and run it on your own. But I just wanted to show that we can run Docker Desktop or use the standard Docker Compose workflow. Let's see. Like this is stuff that I'm just used to doing, right? So I'm starting a database, and then I'm going to run, let's see, calcom. Let's run that. That's going to bind to my local port, and then I'm going to be able to develop on localhost 3000 and just talk to localhost 3000. So for me, there's really no reason to not just go ahead and switch and try to use Rancher Desktop and just use it out of the gate for your standard Docker workflows, and then start to choose and progressively enhance your skill sets into that Kubernetes skill set. Let's see.
Now, if I had been doing the demo, I would have done this all in Containerd because that's what I understand better. But Colin does better with the Docker stuff, and that's great. You know, I wanted to let him do that because he does it better than I do.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions on like developer workflow for this stuff? Sure.
So can you switch between a secondary local cluster, or is it just remote clusters?
So with Scaffold and those other tools, I can switch to remote clusters, any remote cluster that I want. Rancher Desktop does run its own cluster, but in Rancher Desktop, you can switch Kubernetes contexts to those remote clusters and use those. I've never really tried it. You may be able to, but I think it's probably just one local. But you can run different WSL distributions. And so that's one way you could do it as well and segment, yeah. But that is an important note. You can manage and switch Kubernetes contexts here, and I always forget about that because I'm so used to doing it now. That is one common way common struggle that developers have is like, okay, so how do I talk to that remote cluster now? You switch your Kubernetes context, manage your kubeconfig, stuff like that.
One thing that Rancher Desktop has too is a nice reset button, because if you get yourself wrapped around the axle and you want to just reset it, it's very easy to do that. So,
I wonder if that ever works.
What is the minimum system requirement to run this
Sorry?
minimum system requirement?
It's pretty lightweight. I wouldn't go with anything less than 8 gigs of memory.
I'm on 16.
Yeah, so like one of the powerful things about Kubernetes, right, is that we can run entirely packaged applications, like really complex packaged applications using Helm for the most part, right? But we get into this developer mindset where now we're treating those applications as siblings to our applications and not like embedded dependencies or things that we're kind of wrapping around. We want peer APIs to communicate with. And when we use complex applications and develop those locally, sometimes if we're not packaging our containers properly, or we're not being disciplined about runtime immutability and running big Webpack builds and doing crazy things like that on the fly, then that really blows up our memory requirements. But the fun, interesting thing there is developers have full control over how much resources their workloads consume. And so if they learn how to use Kubernetes and update their manifests, their Kubernetes files to restrict the resource reservations, then if they have trouble running these on their local machines, they're probably going to see resource constraints up in production as well. And that can provide some back pressure and some education to help them restrict those workload sizes on the local machine. But we'll run NuVector as an environment in Kubernetes security tool. We'll run that alongside of our applications on our developer machines. I'll run KubeCost, that's a great one as well. So as a developer, I can get an understanding of how much this workload is going to cost, which is a really interesting thing that developers wouldn't typically have to think about. But I can run all of those comfortably on my laptop alongside basic applications that I'm developing. You start to see problems if you're deploying like Elastic Kubernetes Cloud alongside a complex API with an ETL job and some things like that. But that's when you can start to switch your kube context and just start to develop on a remote cluster that way and save some of those resources or get access to some of those resources. And so Rancher Desktop will let those developers choose to be able to do that and switch to a new cluster and use the same tool that they're used to using.
Cool. If you just have one Docker daemon actually that will be used by the Kubernetes.
Yes. Yeah, so same workflow you're used to.
So whatever we download on the Docker images, it will be similar.
Yeah. So when you use remote Kubernetes clusters, you'll need to get familiar with the flow, in some cases of pushing to a remote registry or adding credentials and secrets to be able to pull from a remote registry if it's a private image. But what you're doing is you're providing configuration files to that remote Kubernetes, and it's responding to those resource files and orchestrating itself.
I got 2 more slides I want to show.
Perfect.
This is just some resources that people can draw on. So the SUSECon site is still up. You can go out there and grab the lot of resources are out there. There were a lot of demos done last year at SUSECon for this. Also, the website down there, rancherdesktop.io, has a number of other demos that are actually you can go take a look at. You can see how people have tied this into things like VS Code, into Eclipse and different things. That's all very doable. So there's a bunch of demos out there. Let's see. I had got this out of context. I'm sorry, because I had stuck. I had another slide I was wanting to show you. That basically, our SUSECon is actually coming up again. It will happen it happens in June. So it's going to be in Munich this year. So I don't know if anybody here from Europe or would like to get a trip to Europe over in the early summer. If you do, I urge you to go take a look at SUSECon, susecon.com. Will be coming up. There will be tons of educational stuff going on there about Rancher and SUSE and all the things that we're working on. So we urge you to go take a look at that as well. And please do come by the booth later on. We're booth 22. Happy to show you more about this if you're interested. I know one of the things I demo a lot of times when I'm showing Rancher Desktop is I'll run SQL Server in a container. I always think that's fun, but to each his own, I guess. But that's a fun thing to do. But anyway, that's kind of all for today, and I really do appreciate you coming by today, and hope you got something out of this. So, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Thank you.